22 years I've been doing this work. 22 years of tearing open walls, pulling out the guts of houses, exposing what people have hidden or forgotten. I know Cleveland's neighborhoods like I know the inside of my own hands. Tremont, Ohio City, Collinwood, the West Side, all those blocks of Victorian and Edwardian structures that the city was built on. You learn to read a house when you've worked on enough of them. You learn what's normal and what's not. You learn the language that walls speak. That's why, when we opened up the wall on Wilson Avenue that Tuesday afternoon, I recognized immediately that we weren't looking at a construction problem. We were looking at something intentional, something deliberate, something somebody had gone to significant trouble to hide. I'm a general contractor out of Cleveland, Ohio. Built a reputation on moving fast without cutting corners. That's rare. Most either rush and give you garbage or bleed you dry. When Tyler and Megan came to me with a 1891 Victorian in Tremont, they were young flippers who'd found their golden ticket. 4 bedrooms, original millwork, good bones, and the price was too low. The house had sat 4 months on the market, which meant something was off. But they had financing and wanted demo done fast. Down to the studs by end of week, Tyler said. That's when the red flags should go up, when someone wants to rush a 100-year-old house. I brought my standard team. Tony Marchetti, 14 years with me, reads building codes like novels. Marcus Washington, my demo specialist, fastest at tearing walls. And my son Danny, 24, learning the trade right. Danny notices things. That matters in this work. We started Monday morning, July the 13th, 2015, a hot day with thick summer air. The neighborhood was in transition, some blocks revitalized, others still had recession boarded ups. Wilson Avenue was somewhere in between. The house was in reasonable condition for its age. Eleanor Kowalski, no relation to me, had let it slip toward the end. She'd passed away 8 months before, and the estate just wanted the title cleared. We did the standard walkthrough on day 1, basement to attic, checking what was load-bearing, what could come down. The 3rd floor was the focus. 3 bedrooms with original lath and plaster, layered with old wallpaper and paint. Back in 1891, that was state-of-the-art. By 2015, it was dusty, heavy, fragile, full of a century and a quarter of whatever had nested in it. We were on day 3 of the project Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. We'd already cleared 2 of the 3 bedrooms and were working our way through the back bedroom, the one on the south side of the house that overlooked the yards of the neighboring properties. The sun was pouring in through the windows, old single-pane glass original to the house, wavy and uneven. Danny and I had been taking turns with the pry bar and hammer, loosening the lath from the stud so we could pull it down in manageable sections. Marcus was working the opposite wall. Tony was downstairs, planning the next phase with Tyler and Megan. The work was rhythmic, almost meditative once you got into the groove. Swing the hammer, feel the resistance, pry, listen to the wood splinter, pull, watch decades of dust cloud up in the sunlight, swing again. Tony came back up around 3:30 after our lunch break, sandwiches from Corky and Lenny's, pastrami and turkey, the good stuff that makes the day bearable. We were standing by the window when Tony grabbed his hammer and started on a section we hadn't reached yet. Maybe 2 minutes of swinging, and I heard it. The sound changed. The density was wrong. When you hit studs and joists, it sounds like wood. When you hit lath and plaster, it's a dull thud. But this sounded hollow, not solid, not right. "Hear that?" Tony said. He pulled back and looked at the wall, crack in the plaster around the impact. He leveraged out a chunk with the claw end. More plaster came away. He kept working, careful now, understanding something was off. Danny came over with a flashlight. The hole got bigger. The beam went in, and what we saw next is burned into my memory in a way only certain moments are. There was wall space behind it, not the exterior wall of the house, not insulation, not the back face of the next room's drywall. Real, empty, open space, a void, about 4 feet wide, running the full depth of that wall, which would have been about 10 feet if it ran all the way back to the outside edge of the house. It was dark in there, completely dark except for the beam of Danny's flashlight. And as we opened up more of the plaster, pulling it away in larger chunks now, we started to see what was in that space. At first it was just shapes, a mattress, a single bed, full-sized, with stains on it, brown stains, age stains, stains that might have been from anything, sweat or spills or something worse. A sleeping bag over the top, blue, the kind you'd buy at a camping supply store, and it had been used, slept in countless times. The material was worn smooth in spots. Along one wall of the void, stacked with careful precision, were dozens of cans, soup cans mostly. Progresso, Campbell's, some beans, canned peaches and syrup, canned corn. The arrangement was almost ritualistic, organized by type, like someone had taken time to create a system, some kind of order in the dark. A plastic milk crate held a battery-powered LED lantern, the kind you can pick up at Home Depot for $30, and the battery indicator light was still glowing green. The lantern looked new, or at least relatively new. Not something from 1891, not something from decades past, something recent. There was a bucket in the corner, and I watched Tony lean down to peer at it. His face changed. He straightened up very slowly, and he looked at Danny and then at me. He didn't say anything, but his expression said everything. The bucket's purpose was clear. We all understood what we were looking at. This wasn't some forgotten space from the original construction. This wasn't a hidden compartment that had been sealed up in 1891 and left undisturbed for over a century. This was a room. Someone had built themselves a room inside the walls, and someone had been living in it, recently. Very recently. There was a paperback book on the crate next to the lantern. A murder mystery, the spine creased from being read multiple times. The cover was soft, the pages yellowed. On the plastic crate itself, things were arranged with deliberate care. Batteries for the lantern, water bottles, a flashlight, a journal, small leather-bound, with notes on the pages. We didn't touch any of it. We just stood there, the three of us, and felt the air in that bedroom shift. It got heavier. It got cold, even in the July heat, even with the sun pouring through the windows. "Nobody move," I said. I'm not sure why I said it. We weren't in danger of damaging anything anymore. We'd already torn open the wall. The space was exposed. But that instruction felt necessary somehow. Like, if we stayed very still, if we didn't disturb anything else, we could undo what we'd just discovered. We didn't move. We just stood there and stared. I called Tyler and Megan. They arrived about 10 minutes later, both in work clothes. Tyler was in insurance, Megan in marketing. They had that look young professionals get when their investment is about to become complicated. Anxious, calculating losses. I took them upstairs and showed them the space. We'd widened the hole in the wall by then, pulled away enough plaster that the mattress and the bucket and the canned goods were all visible in full daylight. Megan's hand went to her mouth. She didn't make a sound, but I could see her processing it, her mind working through the implications. Tyler just stared. He stared for a long time without saying anything. Then he walked closer and leaned in to look at the lantern, the batteries, the book. "That lantern's new," he said. "Maybe a year old. Maybe less." "Yeah," I said. "That's what I thought." Megan sat down on the floor, right there in the middle of the bedroom, not caring that she was sitting in decades of dust and debris. "We heard things," she said quietly. "At night. We thought it was the pipes. We thought the house was just old and settling, you know? Old pipes making noise. We Googled it." She looked up at me. "It says old pipes settle and make noise. It says it's normal in Victorian homes." "What kind of sounds?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. "Footsteps," Megan said, "or something moving, and we heard water. Someone running water, I think, and the sound like something heavy being moved. At night, 2, 3 in the morning, we both heard it." Tyler nodded slowly. "Food went missing from the kitchen," he said. "We thought we were just forgetting that we'd eaten things. We thought maybe we had a mouse problem, something like that. We were going to call an exterminator after we got the house done." He paused. "But looking at this, looking at the canned goods, the mattress, the lantern." "He came out," I said. It wasn't a question. "He came out of the space and went downstairs." Tyler looked at me, and I could see the full weight of it hitting him, the vulnerability of it. They'd been sleeping downstairs while someone was living in the walls, breathing the same air, using their bathroom, eating their food. "Did you hear anything else?" I asked. A toilet? Flushing? Twice, Tyler said. Once when we were having dinner. We heard it from up here. We thought the plumbing was backed up or something. We didn't call a plumber because the water still drained fine. He stopped. And once at 2 in the morning. We both heard it and mentioned it to each other the next day. We were thinking we should get someone to look at the pipes. I walked over to the closet in that bedroom, the standard bedroom closet built into Victorian homes, deep, narrow, with a single shelf and a rod for hanging clothes. It was empty now. I felt the back wall. Then I felt along the seams and found them, tiny holes where screws had been, the metal still bright and unoxidized around each hole. Fresh. Recent. I looked at the back panel of the closet more carefully, and I could see the outline of where something had been fastened to it, multiple times, unscrewed, fastened again, unscrewed again. There's an access point, I told them, behind the closet back panel. Someone was coming in and out of that space through here. I did something I should not have done. I should have called the police right then. Instead, I got a screwdriver from my tool belt and started working that back panel loose. It had been screwed in tight. Whoever it was had really torqued those screws down hard, and even though the screws were gone now, the panel still had some warping that made it resistant. I worked it slowly, carefully, using the screwdriver as a pry bar, working around the seams until the panel finally came free and I was able to lift it out of the frame. The gap opened like a mouth. I could see the mattress from a different angle, more of the crate, personal items. There was a small folding camping table. On it, a notebook, a photograph in a plastic frame, a prisoner's cell. That's what it was. Someone had built themselves a cell and sealed it shut. The organization of it struck me harder than the discovery itself. Someone had accepted this confinement, had organized it. That psychological reality, someone choosing this, accepting it as necessary, that was worse than the physical evidence. "I'm calling the police," I said. "This is above my pay grade." I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said officers would be there within the hour. While we waited, I went downstairs and found the disclosure documents that Tyler and Megan had received at closing. The house had belonged to Eleanor Kowalski. The name was just a coincidence, no relation to me despite sharing the surname. She had passed away 8 months prior, and the estate had been cleared quickly. But there was another name on the document, Dennis Kowalski, age 39, listed as a secondary occupant and marked as relocated in the occupancy section. Relocated. Like he'd moved to another state, like he'd started a new life somewhere. Except he hadn't. He'd been living in a wall. I went next door and talked to the neighbors, an older couple who had owned their house since 1998. I asked them what they knew about Dennis. "Hardly anything, to be honest," the woman said. She was maybe 70, sharp eyes, seemed like the type who kept track of neighborhood business. He used to go out sometimes when he was younger. We'd see him leave the house, come back. But then at some point that just stopped. I want to say it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. He just didn't leave anymore. We assumed Eleanor had some kind of arrangement with him. Maybe he was on disability. Maybe there was something going on that wasn't any of our business. After she passed, we didn't think much about him. Figured he'd relocated, like the paperwork said. Figured he was somewhere else now, starting over. 5 years. Dennis hadn't left the house in 5 years, or close to it. He'd been sealed in that wall while the world moved on outside, while his mother aged and eventually died, while the house was sold to strangers, while those strangers moved in and lived their lives downstairs, oblivious. The police arrived in a patrol car about 40 minutes later. 2 young officers doing standard procedure for a potential squatter report. I took them upstairs and showed them the sealed room. They photographed everything. Professional, methodical, but I could see the micro-expressions underneath. They'd found something outside normal scope. One officer photographed the mattress, cans, lantern. The other examined the closet access point and came back. "Still clear back there," he said. "Repeated foot traffic, regular use." A sergeant showed up after them and asked if the homeowners were present. Tyler and Megan were in the kitchen, shell-shocked. The sergeant went to talk to them. I heard Megan describing sounds, missing food, the toilet flushing at odd hours. Then Tyler said something that made our blood run cold. "There's no toilet on the third floor," he said. "We had the inspector check the plumbing. The pipes don't reach up this high. The closest bathroom is on the second floor." So Dennis had been coming down from his sealed room, going down the stairs, using the second-floor bathroom in the middle of the night while they slept. The image of that, the risk he was taking, the necessity that had driven him. It was sickening. The police widened the search. One officer went out to check the garage, the shed in the back, the entire property. The rest of us waited in the kitchen. No one talked. The silence was heavy with implication. Then we heard the radio on the officer's shoulder crackle with static and a voice. "We've got a subject. Detached garage, southeast corner of the lot. Male, appears to be cooperative. No signs of aggression." Dennis was in the garage. He'd run when the wall came down, and his world was exposed. He'd been watching as we tore through the plaster and opened his sealed room. Then he fled to the detached garage where he'd been storing supplies. I didn't see him. The police took him away, and later we learned he was being held for psychiatric evaluation, severe agoraphobia, paranoid ideation. Eleanor had built a cage for her son, and he'd accepted it. Over the years, the psychological prison had become real. He couldn't imagine leaving. He couldn't function outside that sealed space. Eleanor had sealed him in. Dennis's mental health had deteriorated over years, agoraphobia, paranoia setting in. Instead of getting him proper treatment, she'd accommodated the illness, let him retreat further. At some point, when he couldn't even leave the house, she'd hired a contractor willing to take cash and build a room inside the walls, a sealed space. She installed him in there like furniture and locked the door. The estate lawyer didn't know. The realtor didn't. The home inspector didn't discover anything. Dennis had been living in the walls while the house was listed, shown to buyers, transferred to new owners. He'd been there eating those cans, using that bucket, while the world above moved on. Tyler and Megan pulled out of the deal. Some houses carry trauma in their walls. You can strip them to the studs, rewire them, replumb them, but the damage remains. I felt it the moment we opened that space. The house went back on the market with full disclosure. Dennis went into psychiatric care. The news moved on. My crew and I moved on. But I never forgot. I learned something from that job. I always tell young contractors now, when they're bidding their first renovation, when they're doing their initial walkthroughs, you check every closet, you open every door, you check for sealed spaces, for inconsistencies in the walls, for dimensions that don't match up. You spend the extra 15 minutes, you crawl into the attic, you get down in the basement, you look for evidence of what this house has been hiding. And if the sellers tell you about spaces that don't line up, or closets that are nailed shut, or walls that feel thicker than they should, you ask questions. You get answers in writing. You hire a proper home inspector. You take the red flags seriously. And if the homeowners tell you they're hearing sounds in the walls that they can't explain, that the house is doing weird things, that food is going missing, you don't dismiss it as pipes settling or mice or normal wear on old architecture. You take it seriously. You take it to the authorities, because sometimes it's not the house that's broken. Sometimes it's not a construction problem. Sometimes it's something far worse, something darker, something that has trapped a human being in a way that no locked door ever could. That job taught me that renovations are never just about the building. They're about the people, the history, the damage written into a structure's bones. When you tear open walls, you're not just exposing bad wiring. You're exposing secrets. You're exposing suffering. You're exposing the places where humans have failed each other in fundamental ways. It's a weight I carry now. Every house I work on, I'm more careful, more thorough, more aware that I might find something that changes everything. And I'm grateful that, in the end, someone finally got help. Dennis finally got out. We all need to get out eventually. Some people just need a little help with that wall. I've been doing this work for 14 years. Started in the Navy, fixing plumbing on ships, which teaches you to think three-dimensionally about systems under pressure. After I got out, I took that same methodical approach and built Washington Plumbing and Bath into something solid. Not flashy, but steady. Savannah's a humid town where the moisture never really leaves the air. Old pipes, old houses, original cast iron still singing with rust. Homeowners around here don't always understand what they're hearing when the house settles, but I've learned to listen to what the house is actually saying, not what people tell me it's saying, but what the structure itself is communicating through its bones. The Ansley job came through a referral in early March. Philip Ansley had just closed on a row house on East Gordon Street in the Victorian district, about 3 blocks from Forsyth Park. The house was built in 1887, one of those narrow brick numbers that had been sitting empty, waiting for someone with money to care about it. Philip had that money. From a divorce settlement, he mentioned. He wanted the master bathroom gutted and rebuilt. Original to the building meant cast iron fixtures from the Gilded Age, probably lead-based solder, tile work that had somehow survived a century and a half without renovation. Philip wanted everything stripped. The hex tile, beautiful black and white pattern, the kind you see throughout the Victorian district, probably worth something to salvage specialists. He didn't care about that. He wanted modern. He wanted subway tiles and restoration hardware fixtures and heated floors. He wanted to erase what was there and start over. Said he was building a fresh start, that everything about the old bathroom reminded him of the marriage he was leaving behind. I understood that. People compartmentalize differently. Some people move across the country. Some people just remodel the master bath. He gave me a week to assess and bid. Said he wanted to start immediately after. I pulled into the narrow street on a Tuesday morning in mid-March. Savannah was already thick with humidity, the kind of thickness that makes the air feel textured, like you're breathing through damp fabric. The row house was painted dark blue with black shutters, well maintained on the outside. The kind of exterior that tells neighbors you've got money and standards. The kind of facade that says everything inside is fine. Philip met me at the door. He was tall, lean, early 50s maybe, cordial and professional. He showed me upstairs without asking me to remove my boots. Most homeowners make you take them off. Philip didn't care. Either he was confident the house would be completely rebuilt soon, or he'd already stopped thinking of it as his home. The bathroom was exactly what he'd described. Standard Victorian layout, a long, narrow room with a window that faced the alley between buildings, a cast-iron tub on legs, a pedestal sink, and walls tiled in that hex pattern from floor to eye level. The tile was in genuinely good condition. The grout was tight, the mortar hadn't failed, there were no water stains or mold creeping up from the subfloor. Someone had actually maintained this bathroom for more than a century, which is unusual. Most owners in Savannah don't care about original bathrooms. They see them as outdated and rip them out. But this one had been kept, treated well, sealed. The tile itself was the color of old money, that black and white alternating pattern that feels expensive when you look at it close. "When was the last renovation done in here?" I asked, running my hand along the wall. "Not since the 80s, I think," Philip said. "Previous owner said it was the 70s, but honestly, it's all original, except the fixtures got replaced sometime in the 90s. The bones are solid." That struck me as odd. The tile was too clean, too sealed, too much like someone had cared about it recently. But I didn't push it. I took measurements, photographed the space, and confirmed what he wanted. Gut it all, pull the tile, replace the subfloor if necessary, build new walls, install new fixtures, new flooring. He wanted it modern, and he wanted it done in 2 weeks. I told him 3, gave him a bid that was fair, and we shook hands. He signed the estimate right there on his kitchen counter without haggling. That was my first real warning sign, though I didn't read it right then. I started the tile removal on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the initial assessment. I'd done this work hundreds of times. You use a pneumatic chisel, a tool that jackhammers at about 3,000 beats per minute, controlled by your hands and your experience with how much pressure the subfloor can take. You have to be careful and methodical. Each tap, you feel the mortar giving way in small increments. The hexagons came up one by one, released from their bed like teeth being pulled from a jaw. The work is loud and dusty, and you wear a respirator because the dust contains centuries of particulates. Whatever was in the mortar back in 1887, whatever sealants got applied over the decades, particles of lead if you're unlucky. Under the tile was the subfloor, heart pine, good grade, the kind of wood they don't use anymore because old-growth pine had different properties than plantation pine. The subfloor was sealed with what looked like a recent coating, maybe 2 years old, maybe newer. That struck me as unusual. Most homeowners don't mess with subfloors that are working fine. You seal them if they're exposed and you're worried about moisture, but sealed subfloors usually stay that way for decades. The sealant was fresh enough that it hadn't started yellowing yet. Fresh enough that someone had made a deliberate decision to seal this particular piece of pine, maybe to protect something, or maybe just because they were being thorough. That's when I saw the first set of letters. They were scratched into the wood in block capitals, carved deep enough that they went right through the sealant and into the pine itself. The gouges were clean and deliberate, not old damage, not natural wear from settling or water exposure. Someone had taken a sharp object, a utility knife or a chisel or a screwdriver, and pressed it into this wood after the sealant was laid down, after the tile was installed back over it. Someone had done this knowing that these marks would be hidden for years, maybe decades, until someone like me came along and did exactly what I was doing, pulled up tile, looking for trouble underneath. The first message read, "She is still in the house." I stopped working. In 14 years of contracting, you learn to read spaces the way a doctor reads x-rays. You read pipe pitch and water stains and the patterns where things have shifted or corroded. You learn that a house speaks if you know how to listen. It speaks in the color of the water in the toilet tank, in the places where drywall has cracked, in the gaps where doors don't close right because the framing has moved. This house was speaking to me in that moment, and it was saying something wasn't right. It was saying that someone had felt desperate enough to deface this subfloor with a message, to hide those words under tile and sealant, knowing they might never be seen again, but also knowing they had to be left somewhere. I pulled out my phone and took a photo before I moved another tile. Then, I photographed the message from 3 different angles, under different light. My Navy training was kicking in. Document everything, don't assume. Process the information methodically before you decide what it means. Over the next 2 hours, I worked that bathroom carefully, lifting tile by tile, and each new section of subfloor revealed more messages. Wesley Brock was here. A date scratched below it, March 2024. Another message, shorter and more urgent, check the basement, and a final one, positioned at the far edge near where the old pedestal sink had been bolted down, tell someone, Wesley Brock. Someone had scratched his name into the subfloor. Someone had been working in this bathroom, had encountered something that scared them, and had decided that the only way to warn the next person was to leave proof that couldn't be talked away or explained away. The messages were positioned carefully, deliberately, under sections of tile that would absolutely come up during standard renovation work. Wesley, or whoever was leaving the messages, had made sure they'd be found, had made sure someone would have to acknowledge them. I sat back on my heels on the dusty wooden subfloor and thought about what that meant. Someone had been in this house doing work, probably the same kind of work I was doing now, and had discovered something that sent them into survival mode. They'd scratched a man's name into wood. They'd written, check the basement in letters deep enough to last for years. They'd written, tell someone, like they were drowning and this was the only way to ask for help. The house was empty except for me. Philip had given me a key and told me to work at my own pace, to lock up when I left. No questions about timing, no checking in, no supervision. That was unusual too, but not unheard of. Some homeowners don't want to watch renovation work happening. It's depressing, seeing their house torn apart. But it meant I was alone here, and I was looking at messages that could mean anything from a contractor having a mental breakdown to something that would bring the police into this narrow blue house with the black shutters. I pulled out my phone again and looked at the photos I'd taken. I didn't need to speculate about what the messages meant. I only needed to report what I'd found, but I also needed to understand what I was looking at. I started moving through the house, systematically. I walked the second floor first, checked the hallway closets, looked at the other bedrooms. Nothing unusual. Then I moved downstairs into the living room and the kitchen. The kitchen had been updated recently. Expensive work, stainless steel fixtures, new countertops, the kind of renovation that costs money. It looked lived in but careful, like someone was maintaining an image for outsiders. The living room matched that aesthetic. Everything was arranged, nothing was scattered. The house felt staged, not lived in. But the basement door, the one in the hallway beside the kitchen, That door had a new deadbolt. Brand new, installed on the hallway side. The kind of lock that secures from outside the basement, not inside. I'd seen locks like that before, installed by contractors to keep people out of dangerous spaces during renovation. But this house wasn't being renovated downstairs. This lock kept something in, or kept someone down there, and it could only be opened from the top of the stairs. I didn't pull that door open. I didn't know what was behind it, and I'm not a fool. Instead, I did something smarter. I walked out to my truck, sat in the humid heat with the AC running and my hands steady on the steering wheel, and I called the Savannah Police Department. I reported what I'd found. I told them about the scratched messages in the subfloor. I told them about the basement door with a lock that only functioned from one side. I told them about the contractor's name, Wesley Brock, and the words, "Check the basement." I gave them the address on East Gordon Street. I gave them everything I'd found, in the order I'd found it, and I waited for what came next. The police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 patrol cars pulled up quietly, without sirens, and 2 officers came to the front door while a third went around the back. They knew what they were looking for, or at least they were being careful about the way they approached it. They treated the house like it might be dangerous, which I appreciated. I met them outside and took them upstairs to the master bathroom. I showed them the subfloor. Detective Morris was in charge, calm and professional, the kind of cop who doesn't ask questions she doesn't already know the answer to. She was probably late 40s, had the kind of weathered face that comes from being in law enforcement long enough to have seen the range of things people do to each other. She photographed the messages with her phone, documented the subfloor, took measurements. Then she went down to the basement. I stayed upstairs, but I heard when she called for backup. The basement was soundproofed. I didn't go down there, but I heard the confirmation in her voice when she called for backup, which meant someone was down there and they needed to be brought up. Philip arrived home while the police were still downstairs. He came through the front door, saw the 2 patrol cars parked on the street, and his face changed in real time. The carefully maintained expression of a man living his fresh start, the divorced businessman rebuilding his life, just fell away like a mask that wasn't well glued. He looked at the police cars, then at me standing in the hallway, and I saw the moment he understood. His jaw clenched. He started to move toward the basement stairs, and 2 uniformed officers stepped in front of him. I didn't hear the conversation that followed. I was standing by the window in the living room, looking out at the moss-draped oaks on the square 3 blocks away, and I was thinking about Wesley Brock. I was thinking about him being in this house, in this bathroom, scratching letters into wood with a utility knife or a chisel, knowing that he was documenting evidence of something serious enough to require documentation. Knowing that no one would believe him if he just told them. Knowing that he had to leave proof. Knowing that some future contractor would have to come along and find it, because sometimes that's the only way the truth gets told. The police brought up Karen Ansley from that basement after 30 minutes. She was alive. She was thin, and she was pale, and she moved slowly, like her body had forgotten how to operate properly after time underground. But she was alive. She was breathing. She was conscious. And the moment the officer supporting her saw daylight, she started crying in a way that broke something inside me, even though I'd never met her before and didn't know her story. I connected with Wesley Brock 6 months later through a mutual contact in the construction community. He'd filed a police report back in March 2024, 2 days after he'd scratched those messages into the subfloor. He told the police that he'd discovered the soundproofed basement room during the original tile work. He'd been the one who sealed the subfloor, actually. He'd been working on it, found evidence that someone was being held down there, and had reported it to Philip. Philip had fired him on the spot, paid him a portion of what was owed, and told him never to come back. Wesley said he knew no one would believe him without proof. So he did the only thing he could think of. He left the proof where he knew it would be found. He scratched those messages into the pine, sealed them back under tile, and spent 18 months wondering if anyone would ever pull up that tile, wondering if he was crazy, wondering if he'd done the right thing, or if he'd just imagined something he shouldn't have imagined. When the police finally came and found Karen Ansley in that basement Wesley was the first person they called as a follow-up witness. His original report had been filed, passed to another division, and somehow lost in the bureaucratic gaps that plumbing companies know all about, the places where things fall through because no one's actively maintaining the system. The case detective who'd taken his initial statement had retired. The follow-up got assigned to someone who never read the file carefully. And for 18 months, Karen Ansley was down there, and Wesley's messages were under tile, waiting to be found by someone who knew how to read them. Philip Ansley is still in a Georgia correctional facility. The house on East Gordon Street was seized as part of the case. I didn't go back to finish the bathroom renovation. But I learned something that day that I've carried into every job since. Every house tells you what's wrong if you know how to listen. Sometimes it's a leak. Sometimes it's mold. Sometimes it's the sound of water moving through pipes in a way it shouldn't be moving. Sometimes it's the absence of sound, a door that locks the wrong way, a basement you're not invited to see, a room that's been sealed up tighter than it needs to be. Most homeowners, when they're acting right, they'll tell you the full history of the property. They want you to fix things. They're honest about what they know and don't know. But when someone's lying, you can feel it in how they answer questions about the foundation, about water damage, about previous work. You can read it in their face when you ask about the basement. You can feel it in a locked door. If you're a contractor and something doesn't add up, don't let them explain it away. Don't convince yourself that you're being paranoid or overly suspicious. Don't tell yourself that you're probably just reading too much into things. Trust what the house is telling you. Document it. Photograph it. Write it down. Call someone. Report it. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a renovation isn't asbestos or bad wiring or lead paint or structural failure. It's what someone built that room to hide. It's what they didn't want anyone to know about. And sometimes the only person standing between that secret and the law is a plumber who knows how to listen. I think about Wesley Brock every time I pull up old flooring now. I think about him knowing something was wrong and feeling like no one would listen. And I think about the fact that he was right. No one did listen, not right away. Not until someone else had to come along and find the proof he'd scratched into the pine with his own hands, message by message, under tile that he knew would have to come up someday. The house was waiting. The house had a story. And eventually, someone had to listen. I've been doing crawlspace work for 9 years, ever since I started my apprenticeship at 22 with IBEW Local 494. You get good at managing the claustrophobia if you're smart about it. Controlled breathing, focus on the task, don't think about the tons of house pressing down above your head. But the Callahan job on Hartley Street in Portland was the first time I found out I wasn't alone under there. I'm one of 3 women in my crew of 12 electricians. The other 2 retired or moved on, so it's been me carrying that torch for a couple years now. Claustrophobia is something I've learned to negotiate with, respect it, understand it, work around it. My therapist taught me breathing exercises that make the difference between a calm job and a panic attack crawling through 30 feet of belly-down darkness. The Callahans, Rob and Jess, had called me out because the original knob and tube wiring was failing. Knob and tube is the stuff from the 1930s and 1940s, copper wire insulated with rubber and cloth, held up by ceramic knobs. The insulation crumbles into dust when you touch it. Their house was a 1947 Cape Cod, tight spaces, low ceilings, foundation walls made of rough fieldstone that weeps moisture in the spring. They'd tripped the main panel twice in 1 week trying to run a microwave and the coffee maker at the same time. The house was only rated for about 60 amps. I quoted them for a full rewire, removal of the knob and tube, installation of new Romex, upgrade to 200 amps. The work would cost them about $18,000 and take 2 weeks. They said yes. I started on a Tuesday morning in late March. Rob and Jess were at work, the kids at school and daycare. Lily, their daughter, was 4. The crawlspace entrance was a hatch under the kitchen linoleum, barely wider than my shoulders. I pulled the hatch cover, grabbed my headlamp and tool belt, and started the army crawl into the darkness. The smell hit me first. Not sewage or mold, though old Cape Cods usually have one or both. This was different. Something stale and lived in. like the air had been breathed too many times by something other than random contractors and inspectors, like someone had exhaled into that space regularly, and the air had just stayed there, hanging in the darkness. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to focus. Old houses smell, dirt smells, fieldstone and moisture and decades-old insulation that's slowly breaking down into talc-like powder. That all has a smell. I was being professional. I was managing my anxiety. I was doing my job. The beam from my headlamp swept across the underside of the first floor joists, the run of original cloth-covered wiring sagging between the wooden supports like veins running through flesh. Some of the insulation had deteriorated so much that bare copper was visible in places. You could see exactly why the panel had been tripping. The copper was corroded, the connections were loose, the load path was compromised. I was mapping out the rewire route, mentally marking where I'd need to run the new Romex in separate runs, 3 new circuits for the kitchen alone, probably, when my lamp caught on something that didn't belong. A sleeping bag. Not just lying there, rolled up tight against the fieldstone foundation wall, arranged deliberately, positioned in a way that suggested someone had thought about where to put it. Next to it, a gallon jug of water, maybe a quarter full, with sediment collected at the bottom. A pile of granola bar wrappers, at least a dozen, crumpled and organized into a small heap. And an extension cord, orange, maybe 50 feet, the kind you'd buy at Home Depot, snaking through the joists toward the house above, disappearing up between the rim joists where the first floor met the foundation. The cord was secured with electrical tape at regular intervals, professional looking. Someone hadn't just left it there by accident. I stopped moving. In a crawl space, stopping feels worse than it should. You're horizontal, confined. Everything is weight and pressure, and the cold air of a space that barely contains you. The darkness seemed to press in tighter, and suddenly the tons of house above weren't theoretical anymore. They were real. They were pressing down. My breathing went shallow. I forced myself to count to 4. Hold it. Exhale slow. This is what we're trained for. This is the breathing. This is management, professional focus. I followed the extension cord. It traced a path through the joists like it had been run deliberately, organized even, planned. Not a forgotten leftover from some contractor doing a one-off repair. This was a setup. The cord disappeared up through a gap in the floor above, maybe near where the kitchen would be, right around where I'd come down through the hatch. Someone had run power from the house down into the crawl space. Someone had been drawing electricity from the Callahan family's own meter to charge things down here. To live down here. My heart rate had moved past uncomfortable into territory I recognized from therapy. This is panic. This is your nervous system seeing something it's interpreting as a threat. I pulled myself along the joists, my hands shaking slightly on the support beams, moving toward the interior of the house, away from the foundation, toward the rim joists under what I guessed was the kitchen or pantry area. The crawl space was tight here, maybe 2.5 feet of clearance, and I had to move like a cat, chest down, arms extended. My headlamp found it, a clean, deliberate cut in the floor framing, not a gap from settling or age or wood rot. Someone had used a jigsaw or a reciprocating saw to cut an opening in the floor itself, creating a hatch between the crawl space and the house above, and the opening was covered. From above, they'd installed a panel that looked like part of the floor or the pantry shelf. Removable. Easy to use from both sides. I could see the hinges from below. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone being clever about something they inherited from the old owners. Someone had been going up into the house at night. I'm not usually a person who panics. Electricians deal with live circuits, sharp tools, unstable attics, old plumbing that sprays rusty water, and God knows what else. You learn control. You learn to separate your emotional brain from your task-focused brain. You learn that fear is a system malfunction, and you need to override it. But army crawling backwards out of a crawl space while your hands shake, while your breathing is doing its own thing, independent of your conscious effort to control it, while you're acutely aware that someone, has been down here regularly and might still be down here, that's its own particular nightmare. I could feel the weight of the house on my back like a hand pressing down, and now I knew I wasn't imagining the presence in that dark space. Something had been down here with me. Not that second, probably, but regularly. Repeatedly. Dozens of nights. Maybe more. The tally marks had given it away, though I hadn't consciously registered them yet. My subconscious had seen them and triggered the alarm. I got out through the kitchen hatch and called Rob on his cell. My hands were actually shaking. I had to dial 3 times because my fingers kept hitting the wrong numbers. "Hey, Amy," he said, "did you get started?" "Yeah, Rob, you need to come home, right now. Don't ask me questions on the phone, just come back to the house." He got home in 20 minutes. He was a contractor himself, so he knew when something was seriously wrong. Jess came separately from her downtown office about 15 minutes later, pulled into the driveway with the confusion already on her face. They looked at me standing in their kitchen with dirt on my clothes and something close to fear on my face, and I took them to the kitchen hatch. "There's someone living in your crawl space," I said. "There's a sleeping bag, supplies, an extension cord running up from down there through your floor. Someone's been accessing your house through a cut hatch in your pantry floor." Rob went pale. Jess sat down at the kitchen table without being asked to sit down. "What?" Rob said. "That's not... We would have... Show me your pantry," I said. The pantry was small and cramped, the kind of utility closet that passes for a pantry in a 1947 Cape Cod, lined with shelves, Rubbermaid containers, the normal stuff. Jess pointed to the bottom shelf on the left side. It was a thin piece of plywood, removable, sitting loose in its frame, designed to look permanent, but meant to come out. When Rob lifted it with his fingers, you could see directly down into darkness. The opening was just big enough for a person to squeeze through, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet, maybe a little more. Enough for an adult to lower themselves down into the crawl space with practice. Enough for an adult to push themselves back up. "Oh my God," Jess said. "Oh my God, that was here. That was already... We never noticed it. The previous owners had that shelf. We just kept the shelf." My mind was working through the timeline of her words. The previous owners, how long they'd been there, when they'd moved out, how long the Callahans had been in the house, and then something else clicked. A piece of information that had seemed ordinary before suddenly became everything. I looked at Jess. "You mentioned your daughter. You said she was having nightmares about someone watching her sleep." Jess nodded slowly, and her face did something that would stay with me. Her expression shifted from confusion to understanding to horror all in about 4 seconds, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped back loudly against the linoleum. "No," she said. "No. Lily said that weeks ago. She said someone was watching her. We told her it was a dream. She stopped talking about it. We thought..." She didn't finish the sentence because the sentence had no ending that made sense. "I told them to call the police. I told them not to go into the crawl space, not to touch anything." I sat at their kitchen table while Jess called 911, and I tried to keep my own breathing under control. The crawl space suddenly felt different in my memory, not just claustrophobic and cold, but inhabited, watched, not empty. The sleeping bag I'd found, the deliberate arrangement of supplies, the extension cord running power, the hinged hatch in the floor. All of it had meaning now. All of it was evidence of something that had been happening in their house while they slept. And I hadn't told them about the tally marks yet because I hadn't mentioned them, but they were down there. I'd seen them when I was backing out of that crawl space, my heart rate climbing back toward normal, my hands steady enough to grip the joists again. Scratches on the underside of the joists, crude but deliberate, groups of 5 with a slash through them, the way prisoners mark time. Dozens of them, maybe 50 or 60. 1 mark for each night someone had been under that house, in that crawl space, living in the dark under the Callahan children, living under Lily's bedroom. The marks were scratched into the wood with what looked like a rock or a piece of concrete or something sharp and mindless. They formed a chronicle of intrusion. The police arrived 40 minutes later. 2 patrol officers from the Portland Police Department did a preliminary sweep of the crawl space while I stood in the kitchen describing exactly what I'd found and where. They brought out the sleeping bag, bagged it as evidence. They photographed the pantry hatch. They photographed the extension cord, the jug of water, the granola bar wrappers. They found other things too, a flashlight, a notebook, More trash, evidence bags multiplying. The officers didn't let me see most of it, and I didn't ask to see it, but one of them muttered something to his partner about the notebook having personal notes in it. Observations, details. A detective arrived around 6 p.m. and took a more formal statement. She was thorough, asking about the timeline, the condition of the crawl space, whether I'd seen any signs of someone being there on the day of my inspection. I told her everything. The smell, the arrangement, the deliberateness of it all, the tally marks. She took notes, asked me to walk through the crawl space with her, and I did. Going back down there with a police presence was different. It made it real in a different way. It made it official. They found Thomas Vickery 2 days later, sleeping in his car in a Walmart parking lot in Scarborough, about 30 minutes south of Portland. He was a 34-year-old former handyman who'd done work for the previous owners of the house, maybe half a dozen jobs, nothing major, just the kind of casual contractor work that older homeowners hire out when they need it. Gutters, deck repairs, roof shingles. The kind of work that gave him an excuse to be on the property, to walk around the house, to know the layout. When the Callahans bought the place, Vickery had lost his informal access to the property. He'd been the kind of contractor who showed up when the old owners called, did small repairs, got paid in cash, came back next time they needed something. But before he lost the job, before the ownership transferred, he'd made a copy of the Crawlspace hatch key. They found it on a ring in his car. He'd been entering the Crawlspace regularly for 5 months. 5 months of sleeping under that family's house, 5 months of going up into their home when they slept using their pantry access, 5 months of standing in their children's bedrooms at night. The police found a key on him. It fit the hatch lock perfectly. The scratches on the lock suggested he'd had to fiddle with it sometimes, but it opened. It always opened. The detectives who followed up told Rob that Vickery had detailed notes about the family's schedule. What time they went to bed, Jess usually 10:30 p.m., Rob around 11, when the kids were home from school. Which nights the parents went out. He'd been in the house an average of 3 or 4 nights per week. He'd been using their bathroom, the shower specifically, which Rob and Jess had noticed, eating their food, and he'd stood in Lily's room and watched her sleep while she had no idea that the nightmare she kept telling her parents about was real. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory. The Callahans lasted 1 week in the house before they listed it. I don't blame them. You can't unsee something like that, can't unfeel it. Knowing someone had been that close, that deliberate, that wrong, it rewires you. It rewires your sense of safety and privacy and the boundary between your home and the outside world. Jess told me later that Lily still wakes up at night sometimes, checking her door, checking that it's locked, checking that she's alone. That's the thing about trust violation at that scale. It doesn't heal quickly. It barely heals at all. I finished the crawlspace rewire for the next owners, who bought the place at a reduced price. The market tanked a little once word got out about what happened. They also changed every lock, installed motion sensors in the crawlspace, and sealed the hatch that Vickery had cut through the floor. Smart people. I should have told them what to do, should have told all of them before it happened, should have recognized the danger sooner, or pushed them to inspect more carefully, or done something other than just discover it and call the police. That's the thing about being the first person to know something terrible. You carry the weight of how it could have been different. Thomas Vickery got 42 months in a federal facility. He's still inside, which is where he should be. The Callahans stayed in Portland but moved to a different neighborhood, a newer subdivision with fewer secrets. They sold the Hartley Street house at a loss and never looked back. Lily's therapy is ongoing. Her therapist told her parents that what she experienced, knowing someone was there, knowing she was watched, having the adults dismiss it as a dream, was its own kind of violation that would take years to process. I've added something to every estimate I give now, years later. A line item for a professional crawlspace inspection before the electrical work starts. Most people take me up on it. Those who don't, I make sure to call them back and ask them to reconsider. I tell them the story. Not all the details, but enough. Enough that they understand this isn't theoretical. This is real. This happens to people. It happened to the Callahans. Here's what I wish they'd done before they ever moved in. Have your crawl space professionally inspected, not just for mold or structural issues or asbestos in the old insulation, but to know what's actually down there. Know your access points, count them, know how many keys exist, secure them. When you buy a house, especially an older one, change the locks on everything, and I mean everything. Exterior doors, basement entries, crawl space hatches, garage locks. The previous owner might have handed over the keys, but there's no way to know if they made copies. Don't assume it didn't happen. Assume someone probably did. And here's the one that breaks my heart. Listen to your kids when they tell you about someone in their room at night. Lily told her parents the truth. They thought it was a nightmare because that made more sense than the alternative. But kids see things. Kids remember things. They don't construct elaborate fictional narratives about being watched. If your 4-year-old or 7-year-old or any year-old tells you a specific person came into their room and watched them sleep, if they describe it with detail and consistency, that's not a normal nightmare pattern. That's something to check on. That's something to take seriously, even when it sounds impossible. Especially when it sounds impossible, I still do crawl space work. I've been doing it for another 2 years since the Callahan job, and I'll probably do it for another 15 years if my knees hold out. But I crawl slower now. I check the dark more carefully. I listen more acutely for sounds that don't belong. And I always tell people what I find, and I explain what it means. A sleeping bag under a house isn't interesting or quirky. It's a warning that the perimeter wasn't as secure as they thought it was. It's evidence of a system failure. The crawl space under the Hartley Street house is secure now. But somewhere in Portland, there's probably another old house with access points nobody's checked, with keys nobody tracked, with kids telling stories about people who shouldn't be there. That's the real horror of what happened to the Callahans. It could happen to anyone who isn't paying attention, and you can't unsee it once you understand how easy it is.